Hi, Misha here, and it's been a couple of years since we've done a Hungarian AK video, and it's a Friday night and storming out, or was, so I felt, yeah, why not again? Why not do it again? Now, the first Soviet rifle that FEG produced in Hungary under license was the 48M, 48 Minta. It was a copy of the Mosin M44 carbine, almost exactly like a late Russian, but it had a few differences. But I covered that in a recent video, although I don't know if I'm going to put that one out first or this one. But either way, there'll be a Mosin M44 variants video somewhere around the time of this one to show you a Hungarian factory 02 Mosin. Otherwise, they produced a couple of submachine guns like the PPS-43, but really, the AK-55 was their first entry into the world of 7.62x39, a world that they continued on with into the AKM-63, and then the very famous AMD-65, and then finally the AK-63 or AMM / the AK-63D, AMMS, and actually these two are still current issue in 7.62x39 in Hungary today in 2021, so they haven't ever really transitioned over fully to 5.56, although they do have some special forces that use it, but mostly they're sticking to the good old Soviet cartridge. Likewise, they never really went to 5.45. And with that, let's just jump back and revisit the first milled Hungarian AK-55. Beginning at the beginning, the Hungarian FEG AK-55. Their designation, of course, for the Soviet-Russian AK-47, the AK Type 3. Some few sources claim it's a copy of the AK-2. This isn't correct. They copied the 3. Oh, they had a license. The AK Type 2 was already being phased out by 1953 when Hungary first started expressing interest in adopting the Kalashnikov. By 1954, pretty much the 3 had totally taken over Idishevsk. In 1955, Hungary officially adopted their version of the gun and started working to tool up for it. Really, setup began for the production line in 1957 at the FEG factory, and the first guns were off the assembly line towards the end of 1959. And quite amazingly, they started to be seen in the hands of Hungarian troops mid to late 1960. Pretty quick turnaround. Now, there's a few reasons for this, and you're going to notice this pattern for FEG throughout this. They took a while to tool up, but once they started going, they devoted 80-90% of their total production capacity to making these. So they wanted to do one big run. Now, interestingly, while FEG would do final assembly, make the barrels, the receivers, the machined receivers, were actually subcontracted out to Danuvia. And Danuvia had actually produced subcomponents or even complete rifles under FEG during World War II for things like the Gewehr 9840, which was a contract to the Germans. So the two had already had a partnership. Also, another factory, another firm would make the wood furniture, which, while it is Russian pattern, is a different type of wood. Instead of being birch, most sources say beech. Very standard handguards. Russian pistol grips could either be smooth or checkered. But as far as I know, all of the Hungarian 55 grips were the kind of oversized checkered with the metal tang. Otherwise, they were exactly the same. 16¼ inch medium heavy profile barrel, chrome lined, threaded 14x1 left hand, Type 1 bayonet lug. Well, this really a notch into the front side. The bayonet did most of the mounting. Sling swivel under the gas, or by the gas block. Rear swivel on the back of the receiver. Smooth top cover, slightly heavier. Ported gas tube. Machined mag catch. All that good stuff. And the unique kind of Hungarian sling, which I kind of love and hate. I like the look of it, but this always slips out for me. It's a very long sling, and it's very different from the Russian pattern. So that's what we're seeing here. The details are different. Different wood, different slings. This is a Hungarian 5-cell mag pouch. It has a pocket on the side for an oiler. Another one for a cleaning kit. Shoulder strap. So they were, and it is kind of inspired by the Russian 5-cell, but it is a different take on it, frankly. And yeah, I know I put a Polish mag, and this is just one I grabbed. I just wanted to show that they were using the ribbed pattern of magazine. They might have had some slab sides from Russia, but as far as Hungarian production, the little half moon, they made the ribbed style here. Flipping these over, this has the typical storage compartment in the stock, upper and lower tangs, same style of safety. On the military gun, there'd either be a 1 for single shot or an infinity sign for full automatic, so they didn't really mark them in Hungarian as such. Standard non-lightning cut bolt carrier, and bolt for that matter inside. Standard 800-meter rear sight. Again, slab side handguards. And standard cleaning rod under the barrel. Notice how on the original AK, there's this flat spot under here. I'm pointing that out for a reason. Front sides look the same as well. Of course, these are both builds. There are no factory imports from Russia or Hungary for the milled Type 3. This is, as I've said many times before, a firing line build done years ago using one of the PLO kits. This is one of the MSCs built under the SLR 100H contract. And I've had several of these in, Gordon Tex, Blue Ridge. And I went with this MSC because I liked that they kept the original mag catch here. And I like the phosphate finish they did. Now they are the pinned barrel, unfortunately. But that's really its only detraction. And they didn't blue them. But it's a nice military looking phosphate. I don't mind it. Once upon a time, these Hungarian AK-55 kits were in readily good supply. They were coming over before the barrel ban, so they had all the barrels, they had the front stub. And yeah, so they were kind of a lot of people's first milled AK, and a good example because they're almost an identical to the Russian, just slightly different furniture, wood, and styling. That's about it. But yeah, they made a big run between 59 and 62. And that might seem like a brief period, but they actually cranked out tens upon tens of thousands of these. In 62, they knew that production was going to be coming to an end soon because Russia had adopted the AKM. Other nations were going to it as well. So 63, they kind of wrapped up production using the receivers and other parts that they had. It's also worth pointing out that FEG often produced these faster than Danuvia could actually supply them with receiver forgings. So that was a bit of a slow factor there for them. But even then, they still managed to crank out a bunch. And even after these were out of production, they still stayed in frontline Hungarian service throughout the 1960s, and then into reserve service, and some were given away to allies, and many were actually tossed over to Syria in the 1970s. And a lot of the kits we received in America were in great shape because around 1970 there was a big program to refurbish these. And later on in the video we'll talk about why that is. But yeah, they were refurbished. They continued to issue these at least to second line troops and keep them in reserve just in case. So they weren't really all surplused out, and really until the 1980s, which is why a lot of them came over here in the mid and late 90s and early 2000s. But it's a very high quality AK build. It's kind of hard to top because these are both kit builds, so you know a lot went in here, but it's a very smooth bolt. The machining on it's high quality. Interestingly, they didn't put a lot of markings on the original guns. They didn't have a lot of fancy stuff. Again, pretty basic selector markings. No big FEG logo. By the way, FEG's factory code was 02. Mostly it was just a serial number, much in the Russian or Polish style of 1 to 2 letters followed by a number. But yeah, you can find some builds like these and others around, and this one's on the Bulgarian milled receiver because it was pretty much the only import option back then, and firing line was one of, if not the best, American options at that time and day. It is really one of my favorite guns in the collection. It comes out quite frequently, and I do love its kind of Hungarian connection. And yeah, this was their, I guess, second major Soviet pattern rifle to build after the 48M, the Mosin. But of course, you know, things were progressing quite quickly, and they wanted to get in on the new Hungarian, the new AKM game as well. I love these pouches. They're just neat. SLR 100H with the Wolf WPA. Russia went to the AKM, sometimes called the Type 4, for many reasons. To be fair, the original AK Type 1 was also on a stamped receiver, although very different style. In 1959, they kind of had it back where they needed, so they went to a stamped receiver shell. Still had a forged front trunnion, and originally a forged rear trunnion, although that would be replaced by a cast one in the 70s, which is what this build is actually from. So you'll notice some later features, of course, like the cast gas block, and it has the sling mount slightly on the side of the stock, so disregard those. I'm just bringing out Russians to give a baseline comparison. So the idea was to make these cheaper and faster to produce, sure, but also lighter weight. This has a lighter profile barrel, and of course the receiver is lighter too. By this point we're going to synthetic pistol grips. The furniture is made a little lighter. It's a single tang on the top. You get the idea. It's thin top cover with the ribs. Also, for some reason, they also went to 1,000 meter rear sight instead of 800 because, yeah. And to help tame recoil and automatic fire, they went to the sugar scoop brake. They also added palm swells to the handguard. And they changed the angle of the stock, all in kind of an effort to try to make it more controllable. So yeah, these were in production by 1960 in Russia, and Hungary was immediately interested because FEG, I don't want to say it was it was a well-done factory, but they weren't the most advanced in the world, and if they could crank stuff out faster, and if they could get away from having to subcontract out the machined receiver, more is the better. So yeah, they began investigating around 61, 62 about their own AKM, and by 1963 it was adopted. Now in America, this version is sometimes mislabeled as the AMD-63. That was never a name used in Hungary by FEG or by the military. It was always just called the AKM-63. So pretty much the same name, just with the suffix added to denote their somewhat unique styling. course, we're still continuing on to 7.62 by 39, and we have the standard magazine for it. I think when I showed you this gun a few years ago, it still had a US stock on it. I did put an original stock on a while back. Has the storage compartment. We're still kind of going to the lighter beechwood type furniture. We still have a wood pistol grip, but they have slimmed it up a bit and kind of simplified it. This is sometimes called the eye grip because of the shape. Still has the tang on the top. Have the stamped top cover. This is, of course, on a US receiver. They did nice rivets, though. I'll give them credit. The differences are on the front end here. And at first you may not see them all. This has the same 16¼ inch barrel as the AKM. Interestingly, at least originally, they had the muzzle nut, not the sugar scoop. And they had the early style non-lightning cut machined front sight. Also, of course, the machined gas block with AKM bayonet lug here. Cleaning right under the barrel. But then we get into some differences. Most obvious is this smooth gas tube cover that has no provision for an upper handguard, so the brackets are eliminated. This was done to save on weight, and I would assume they kind of thought to help cooling. Likewise, we have this grill, stamped steel, folded steel, corrugated, ventilated, whatever, metal lower. That again saves on weight and definitely would help with ventilation because of, the barrel is pretty much exposed to the air. And as you know, on the bottom we have the same pistol grip as in the back, just flipped around. About the only difference is the nut it uses at the top is kind of inletted so the barrel can pass over it, but otherwise it's the same. We're still using the same basic sling. But of course now the swivels move to the standard AKM position. And we're starting to see a new style of canvas mag pouch. Same basic pattern. We've got a large compartment on the side and then an oiler. And there's a compartment on the inside. Yeah, very complicated, very actually kind of neat mag pouch with a buckle, and then there's actually an internal strap as well. Flipping these over, you'll notice the Russian gun has a lightning cut carrier and the later style safety. This has still the earlier, more rounded style safety, and it has a non-lightning cut carrier. Something Hungary kind of stuck with. And there is another difference here. If you look at the handguard retainer, it is, rounded, of course. But this one, because of the metal handguard and the way it interfaces, is actually a slightly different shape, and it has a secondary hole there. I would assume in case things get stuck. So the Hungarian handguard retainers are different. A little bit on the top, if you can tell. Also, the gas block. Notice how the Russian comes down. There's a pin here, and then it goes kind of round and whatnot, and then you have your AKM bayonet lug. This one stays flat, and you still have your lug there. So it's kind of still like the milled AK. Still staying flat, but also having the little bit of a lug. It's just differences, parts, And again, we have the non-lightning cut in the back of our front sight, and 14mm threads. Still a chrome line bore, and all that good stuff. There is kind of something else to be said for it too. It has to do with magazines. The so-called tanker mags, the 20-round mags that most people rightly associate with the upcoming AMD-65, actually got their start with the AKM-63 here. Yeah, you can manipulate a 30-round mag in and out, but you are going to bang your pistol grip, at least in a hurry. So, around 1964, Hungary started experimenting and adopting a shorter 20-round mag for those situations where it was more called for. Kind of more of a personal defense thing. And it works better with the foregrip. And of course, Hungary is kind of famous for these mags today. The Hungarian tanker. Some places used to call them officers' mags back in the 90s. Another thing, this has the wood furniture, which is probably what you typically see on the AKM-63. But they also experimented with plastic furniture on this. And the Kalashnikov Concern channel, he tells a very funny story about how the plastic that Hungary used, because they weren't really making their own at that time, was intended for dishware. In fact, I think I might have something like it. Hang on. Meet a plate I've had since college. Actually, I still have several of these left. Okay, it's not identical, but you get the idea. Kind of a bluish. The ones that FEG tried to make furniture from were more of a bluish gray. A little more serious looking, but not by much. And the furniture worked about as well as you'd think plastic meant for dining ware would work out. So you can find pictures, but it was an early effort, but the polymer wasn't right, so they would crack and give way, and kind of like the East German pebble stocks, they didn't have a cleaning kit compartment in the back. In fact, I've seen some of the Hungarian gray, blue stocks sold as East German, because when people think of kind of that 60s plastic, not Bakelite, but true plastic AK furniture, they think East German, not Hungarian. But no, they played around with the notion in the mid-60s, and if nothing else, it's kind of an amusing variant. Anyway, the main big production run for the AKM-63 was from 1963 through 1966, and this time FEG was making essentially everything in-house, and so they were able to crank these out in large numbers, at least relatively so, and of course it being an AKM, that helped speed up production too. And these would kind of quickly replace the AK-55, as well as maybe a few old Mosins and PPS 43s that were still hanging on in frontline Hungarian service. But interestingly, it doesn't seem like these were exported in huge numbers. You don't see a lot of these that got around the world. But the same cannot be said for our next gun. By the way, here's a 4-cell leather belt pouch for the tanker mags. Kind of a mini version of the 5-cell 30-rounders we looked at. Pouches are so much fun. Well, let's move on to the most famous Hungarian AK.
The muzzle blast is present.
My favorite Hungarian, and yours, of course, FEG's very own AMD-65, which basically stands for Automatic Modified Descent. Automatic, of course, coming from the original AK, modified from the AKM, and Descent meaning paratrooper, also can be said to mean the folding stock. They just kind of dropped the K, so it wasn't a crazy long name. And to compare this with, I actually brought out my Chinese Type 56-1 because there's really nothing else quite like this gun. This was the first time FEG really made its own variant. And they kind of led the way in this sense. Very, very interesting guns. So of course the Russians did the AKS milled underfolder and the AKMS stamped underfolder with the stock here. But they still had the 16.25-inch barrel, be it the heavier one or the lighter one. And the back of the receivers were pretty well smooth, nothing sticking out on either version, so that's good. But these could only be so compacted. And Hungary had not yet constructed an underfolder, and there really were not any other side-folding AKs in mass production at this time either, only experiments. Up to this point, say up to 1964, the lightest AK was probably the East German MPI-KM, which was their AKM variant. About the same time they were working on the tanker mags, they started working on a compact version of the AKM-63, and it was first tested and kind of the pattern was frozen and finalized that year in 1965, and production was started up full scale by 1966, and they started to be delivered into the hands of Hungarian troops at least by 1967. So what have we done here? Well, you know it, but the basic receiver and everything is the same. Stamped receiver, rib top cover. We do have the side sling mount again. We have a unique pattern of folding stock we'll look at in a minute. Originally, we did have the wood grips. Actually, you know, the AMD-63, very similar to what's on the Chinese here too. But, you know, having wooden grips on a gun like this did not make a lot of sense. So they kind of went back to the pot and stirred up a new polymer mix. This is more of a black to gray to green hue, says the blind guy. But it's a more flexible, it's almost soft, you can mush it because these are hollow. But it's actually a very durable material. Yeah, it scratches, but breaking it would be pretty difficult. It'd be like kind of breaking hard rubber. We have a very similar handguard arrangement to our AKM-63. The lower is the same. Now your gas tube is actually shorter, and that's because we have a shorter barrel. This is about 12.5 to 12.6 inches. So quite a bit shorter than a 16.25 on a normal AK. And they went with this length for a few reasons. At this time, the idea of a combination front sight gas block really wasn't around. So for one thing, this is about as small as they could make it and still have the front sight and the gas block together. Now it did require them to go to a slightly shorter gas piston. And they went to this big break. Now this is not a booster. The reason they liked this barrel length, it gave them a nice compact package, but it was still long enough that 7.62x39 would reliably cycle. It didn't need a booster or some other form of assistance. It also still delivered pretty good range and performance. They would scale back the rear sight to about 400 or 500 meters. And in theory, the shorter barrel could be more rigid and thus more accurate, but in practice it didn't work out that way because we do have a very short sight radius and there's no way to attach an optic on this one. Now of course this has this extension here, so it doesn't look any shorter, but in reality with the stock folded, this was just 27 inches. Quite compact. Also thanks to the grips and the skeletonized system and the shorter gas, it was very lightweight at about 6.5 pounds. Maybe even closer to 6 unloaded. And yeah, the tanker mag fits well in it, but honestly you can make a 30 rounder fit pretty easily. In fact, let's flip it over and we'll see. So even with both stocks deployed, this is still quite a bit shorter. It's about 34.5 inches if we didn't have the extension on. And yeah, the 30 round mag actually goes in okay. I think the difficulty of getting them in with the foregrip is maybe a little bit exaggerated. It also probably depends on the mag and the gun. And if you're trying to do it one-handed on camera, hang on a sec. It locks in fine. There we go. But this is a pretty unique stock. It's really our first folder. We have a button on the bottom that actually doubles as the screw that holds it in. It was designed to be very lightweight, simple, and it locks up very tight. I really like this stock, and it really is an improvement, I think, over the underfolder, at least in terms of rigidity. Notice again we still have the non-lightning cut carrier, something they would stick with. We have a shorter cleaning rod under the barrel. We still have the unique kind of handguard retainer here with the hole in it. And our gas block is still a flat-bottomed gas block. And then we have our front sight with 14mm threads underneath. And again, this big break, which was intentionally designed to be scary. At least that's the common myth, so take it as you will, but it sounds good on paper, right? The scary break. Shorter rear sight there. Yeah, what a great little gun. Originally, they were designed for, of course, paratroopers, also vehicle drivers, tank crews, those kinds of things. But honestly, once they started to go into service, they were so popular that they kind of became an unofficial standard issue, more or less eclipsing the AKM-63. And they became a popular export for FEG. I think the first purchaser was Saddam Hussein, Iraq, in 1979, who got them just in time to start using them in his war against Iran, who would capture some and use them but back against Iraq. But the AMD-65 would kind of get everywhere over time. Here's another pouch. This is, of course, a newer canvas style, 3-cell. Side pockets. There's actually an internal pocket too. I don't know why, but I really like Hungarian pouches. They're just neat. Of course, this is a one of the Tennessee gun FEG SA2000ms. Probably the last gun we received from the original FEG. There's still debate even today about these. They're a bit of a mystery gun, but they're good guns, and they were imported at a very cheap price back in the day. I know, what do you think? Hungarian guns actually brought over cheap. What a novel notion, huh? But they were assembled from surplus AMD-65 kits on an FEG receiver, and that's why they have the extension on the barrel. And of course, this one up here is my Cotton Customs Chinese Type 56 one. I just brought it out because it hasn't been in a video in a bit. And there are actually a couple of variants of this gun. So let's look at this. I'm talking, of course, about the AMP-69, a grenade launching variant of the AMD-65, because if you have a short, light, folding stock gun, of course the first thing you want to do with it is launch rifle grenades, right? Now, obviously I don't have one, because kits are very rare. Complete guns don't exist, because they were technically select fire, at least could be, you know, the whole third pinhole thing. But I actually do have a pouch for one. Here is the 5-cell we looked at earlier. Notice the small pocket on the side. Here we have a flip over. We have a large pocket on the side, and two small ones on this side for the cleaning kit and the oiler. And this was to hold the grenade launcher attachment for the AMP-69. It's a really neat gun. Ian at Forgotten Weapons is one of the few that's done a video on it. Check it out. It's a crazy, crazy thing. But it's neat. And if one ever came up, I'd buy it, but I'm sure the price would be exorbitant. And here they are together. You can definitely see that it's essentially the same rifle, just shorter barrel and different stock. Exact same lower handguard, slightly different upper. You can tell because it's not, stops there almost before the receiver. This has more of a gap. And again, the 63 will have a bayonet lug, 65 won't. And I know you're smart enough to know, but yeah, don't get fooled by those AMD-63 mutts. Basically, they took AMD-65 kits, put a 16-inch barrel in them, and replaced the folding stock with a fixed rear trunnion. Yeah. The problem is you have a very large gas port for a 16-inch barrel. This has to be opened up some, of course, for being the 12.5-incher. This has the original sling on it. Because I actually do like shooting this one, it has a AKSU sling on it. It's not correct, but it feels right, and it doesn't add a lot of weight. This leather sling is pretty heavy. Anyway, these were the first two stamped receivers that FEG released. And for a time, they were doing well. And then you had the AK-55 in second line service. And once we get into the 70s, really it's the AMD-65. It's the only AK in production. But, of course, this would not last. In the mid-70s, the Defense Ministry had a request for FEG to kind of go back. It needed more guns, and this time to make them more standard, more like the AKM, AKMs. And there were a few reasons for this. Much like today, the AKM-63 and AMD-65 are kind of a love it or hate it look. Certainly unique, if nothing else. And some definitely did not care for them. They also thought that FEG could do a little bit better job on manufacturing, consistency, parts interchangeability, that kind of thing. And they had an eye towards the export market, the foreign market, and they assumed, probably rightly so, that a more conventional looking Kalashnikov would sell better. Thus, around 1975, FEG began work on this next series, and it was introduced between 76 and 77, put into production as the AK-63. So like the AKM-63, just drop the M. At least that was kind of the export name. Internally, the Hungarian military designated it as the AMM, essentially standing for automatic rifle, modified modern, kind of dropping the K from Kalashnikov. In the beginning, it was just called the AK-63 or AMM, but very soon, in 1978, this version was introduced, essentially a copy of the AKMS with the underfolding stock. The original version had a fixed stock like the AKM-63. And to distinguish the two, the fixed stock became the AK-63F, and the folder became the AK-63D. And in military service, the underfolder became the AMMS. So they added an S to it. And it seems like the underfolders were in production and in military service by 1980. And once they had both versions of the AK-63 up and running, this is when they essentially halted AMD-65 production. But keep in mind how much production capacity FEG has, so the fact that they had been making the AMD for 15 years, that pretty much explains to you why we have so many of them. And up here we have my Polish AKMS. This sits in my collection as a standard, 1980s AKMS. Here we have a 4-cell 30-round Hungarian pouch with shoulder strap. I like this design. It's kind of neat. Have a different look. Now a lot of people think of this gun here. This is a Kastner SA-85M as an exact AKMS. Not really. There are some pretty big differences. Yeah, we have the same 16-inch barrel, 16 1/4. We have the same slant brake. The Polish gun up here has the later style front sight base. This one still has the earlier style machined. Same goes for the gas block styling. Now notice this has the standard bayonet lug. This, as all the others we've seen from Hungary, has the kind of flat bottom, almost like they took an AK Type 3 and just, instead of having the hoop, put the full lug on. Small things. Now another thing is the gas tube. Note that this has the ports, the vents in the tube, like the original Type 3. Kind of unusual that they went back to that. We also have kind of an older style slab handguard versus the palm swell. And we still have kind of the unique Hungarian cut lower handguard front retainer. Just a little bit different styling there. As we move back, pretty standard stamped receiver with ribbed top cover, and the Hungarian old underfolding stock is very, very similar. There's only a couple of minor differences. And then finally we have what's become our traditional Hungarian I-type slab pistol grip. So you can see that there are differences. This has the standard Polish Bakelite. The Russians had a slightly different Bakelite grip, but the same thing kind of holds true. And of course we still have our leather sling, although by the 80s they were starting to offer some with the canvas sling. I know by the 90s they certainly were, and I believe in the 80s there were some to be found. And either 20 or 30 round mags. Flipping these over, we can see we've gone to the newer style of kind of flat-edged safety. Our top cover has the hump. But you notice it still has a non-lightning cut bolt carrier. Again, just one of those kind of unique Hungarian features. There's a few little things like that they just kept on doing. Kind of interesting why. Now, I think earlier I said something about Iraq having purchased and being the first export user of the AMD-65. That was just a misspeak. But I was actually thinking of the AK-63D here. Although Iraq did end up with some AMD-65s. Those have been scattering around the world for decades. But yeah, these did start to be a good export for FEG in Hungary. And both the 63D and 63F versions kind of got around everywhere. And they are more or less a conventional looking AKM. And then of course in 1985 they introduced the SA-85M for the American market. I believe these are mainly imported between 87 and 88. And all 7,000 were brought over by Kastner. 4,000 were the underfolder, 3,000 were the fixed stock. And then, of course, in the 90s, we did have the SA-85M post band that had the thumbhole stock, and they removed the bayonet lug and actually the cleaning rod supports from under the barrel. By the way, this still has the one secondary hole next to the cleaning rod, like we've seen on all the others. And then, of course, our final version is our SA2000M. Again, here's our polish, which is very much like a late Russian AKMS. By the way, paint finish on these. They went over from bluing to paint quite some time ago. Hungarian SA-85M. The joys of underfolders. I do apologize for not having an AK-63F for the collection. It would be great to have one of the pre-bang Kastners, but they're just not as common, and prices have gone bananas now. Essentially, it's the same as the AKM-63, but with the conventional handguard and gas tube. So really, not a huge amount of difference. Again, a lot of things like the bolt carrier stays the same. I guess one thing to remind again is that these do have the ported gas tube. And of course the 63F would have a slant muzzle brake instead of a nut as standard. But anyway, just thought I'd mention that. The Kastners are really good, and for a long time I would have said they were very undervalued compared to others, but unfortunately people have finally kind of discovered them, so yeah, those days are over. Well, let's have some final thoughts. Here are some of the Hungarian pouches all lined up. Then it might be kind of good to see them in comparison with each other. The kind of leather pleather ones, and then we get to this canvas. As someone once said a long time ago at a gun shop, it reminds them of like a 1950s Soviet suit. It is kind of that material. It is tough though. I like the shoulder straps that these have, and I also like that they have lots of storage in them, especially the larger ones. But yeah, we've got 3-cell, 4-cell, 5-cell. Alright, let's kind of end back with the firearms. And back where we started. You know, these guns take up a lot more space on the table when two of them have double pistol grips. I just found it interesting how remarkably unchanged production really was from the beginning to the most recent. And believe it or not, the AK-63 and even AMD-65 are standard issue in the Hungarian Defense Forces, the Hungarian Army, to this very day. The original FEG factory ceased full production around 2001. That's actually, I mentioned earlier about the SA2000ms. Those were the post-Magwell magazine limit 97, 98 Clinton band guns. And so those were the last ones we got in from there. They had polymer furniture, took a low cap mag, fixed thumbhole stock. So after 2001, the line, both full and semi, officially closed, although it's probably a sure bet that the Hungarian military had stopped buying new guns long before that. But they're still in service today. There was at one time a push to replace with a 5.56 derivative, but this never really went much past prototypes or pre-production. With the AK-63s, they've been updated to become the AK-63MF. From what I gather, both the Ds and the Fs have been updated, and the AMD-65s have been modernized with the AMD-65M. And both of these, the MF and the M, have received new grips, new collapsing stock, new optics mounts for modern aim points, new laser designators. They can take a HK pattern underbarrel grenade launcher. They can use a Brugger and Thomat suppressor, at least some of them. They have a quad rail. They use command arms, grips and grip pods. You know, the typical modern tactical stuff. But yeah, they're still going in the Hungarian military, which, considering the AMDs are 40 years old or more, and the AK-63s, the AMMSs, are probably at least 30 years old. It's a real testament to the quality of these guns. They weren't especially flashy, and while I really think they're well built, they don't quite strike me as attractive as, say, East German or Polish, but they are very well done. But I think where they excelled was just durability. They seem to have built guns to last. Also, I think a lot of people like the wood that they used. It definitely has its own distinctive Hungarian styling to it. Again, this is an SLR 100 built by MSC, so we can't really count its finish. This is a Bulgarian receiver, but it is a Hungarian barrel, and this is a US kit build with a Nodak receiver and US barrel. I think I said 3 years ago that I was going to put an FB Radom barrel in it. I've got it sitting right behind me, I just haven't done it. But at least I did get rid of the ironwood stock. Of course, this one's a original pre-ban. And now I'm not made of money. It's just when I bought this gun, these were pretty affordable, frankly. And these were actually downright cheap. These were $379.95 brand new from Centerfire, and they were blowing them out. I saw a boatload of these at the store. These TGIs came in. Again, we've done full videos on these, but there's a lot of mystery as to exactly how these came in. But it's nice because it is a Hungarian receiver, original Hungarian barrel. Numbers do all match on these, so hey, no complaints for the money. And they are the the older SA2000M marked receivers that were once single stack that were opened up either by Tennessee Gun or still over in Hungary. I really like these modern, well, not modern, they're 60s, but the plastic rubbery pistol grip. I actually really like this stock too. It has very good lockup. Well, that is it for Hungarian AKs. That's most versions. And really, as far as true imports, all we've ever had are the SA-85Ms and the SA-2000Ms, either this version or the previous thumbhole stalker. We've never received a milled AK-55 variant or a true AKM-63 variant, much less the newer 21st century MFs and 65Ms. These are still being used by other nations too. Afghanistan, Iraq still use them. And of course they're all over South America, East Asia, Africa. Again, they're built to last. So yeah, those are the only Hungarian rifles to ever be imported. With that, I appreciate you tuning in. As always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe. And please check on the link to our Patreon page if you'd like to help support the channel. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time. Oh, no. We're not going there in this video. Nope. Nope.